Hey guys, what's up? AZ here. Came at you with a new style video this time actually. I'm trying to get more into like tutorial style videos. So basically today I'm going to be going over one of my songs on the Polymer EP. It's called Exit. Specifically I'm going to be going over like the different techniques I used in order to make it stand out a little bit better than just like a normal feature-based track. Yeah, we'll just get into it. So the first thing I want to highlight, vocoder thing I do in the intro. So this is what it is. Essentially, that is me singing, but it's running through, I think it's running through a vocoder. Yeah. Okay, here it is. So without the vocoder. Obviously, it sounds pretty shitty. It's essentially going through a vocoder that is being triggered by this channel right here. Which is essentially just playing like a random melody. It's good because now I can make this whole just single clip have a different melody over the course of the intro. I'm pretty sure that's just like a voice memo recording too that I just did, and then I fixed it up with vocoder. So that's one of the first things that I want to do. The next thing I want to highlight is this ARP during the pre-chorus. This is really cool because it's like turning off all the effects. It's kind of boring, just like a very simple ARP. But turning on some Redux, which is basically just bit crusher, some overdrive, and some ping pong delay, you get a little bit more texture, which is nice. And that definitely helps make it like stand out more in the mix. The chords, all right. So a lot of people have asked me about like the supersaws and how I did that. Essentially, this is my supersaw group. This is 2, 4, 5 different layers. So I'm just going to go through each one and basically talk about what they're doing. This main saw is basically just the whole, it's like the main body of the supersaw for me. It's probably like, yeah, it's probably pretty mono right now. It's basically in the center, just making sure that there's some like mono/stereo compatibility. It's not doing a ton. It's not super crazy. It's not super pretty, but it's mostly just like holding the ground for everything else. Yeah, so this one is more playing around with like the stereo image. This is a lot wider. You can see there's a lot of cutting, at least for the mids and the side. I also cut off the high end for the side, and I'll explain why in a second. I think I do the same thing, or actually I don't, not for this side. But as you can tell, the extremely high like EQ side is like not super present, which I'll adjust later. Next is the low saw. This is another thing just for the body. This is also, I think I monoed it and then it just bounced it to like a file just so my computer wouldn't crash. And then we have the Nectar bass, which is basically just the bass line. There's actually 2 layers. There's one high end. And then there's the bass layer, which is just a sub essentially. And I layer both of those together just so the sub comes in a little bit cleaner. And then finally, in order to tackle the whole high-end issue, just making sure that the supersaws like shine brighter, a trick you can do is just using some white noise and then just having it doesn't even need to be set to a note. I just put it to A, I think, because that was the one note that brought out the white noise the most. White noise doesn't have a key, so like there's really no point in like pitching it based on whatever the other things are going. The main thing though is making sure that you're cutting a lot of the lower frequencies. For example, if I leave all that, that's all trash that I don't need. I just want the high end, about 8,000 hertz or kilohertz above. But as you notice, I'm only soloing parts of the side, and then I'm making sure that it's boosting the mids mostly. This way, it's kind of just like an accent, not like a huge part of the main sound. So solo together. It's a pretty simple supersaw, not too crazy. The main reason I did that is because I'm adding more like atmospheric elements like the vocal chops, the brass stabs. The kick is pretty beefy too. There's a lot of low end to it, so I wanted to make sure that that had space. There's also a lot of percussion going on, like this whole group. It's all subtle stuff that's hard panned. Just to make sure I had space in the mix. Going back to the supersaws, the main thing that's creating that wobble kind of effect or LFO effect is auto pan actually. People thought it was auto filter. I'm only using that for certain sections. I don't really use auto filter for the LFO function. I mostly just use AutoPan now. Essentially, it's 100% wet the entire time. Instead of basing the rate off of hertz, it's actually based on notes, which is good because you can time these to certain things. Like you can see, this is the automation for that on the upper section. The rate set to like a specific note, for example. Like at the very beginning, it's going 64th notes, and then it's finally going like 48, 32. Main reason for that is because you get that weird like fluttering effect, which is pretty cool. So I ended up just starting off with a rate, like playing around with that, seeing what I could do to make it cool. And then the next thing I added was some phase shifting. So essentially what AutoPan is like if the phase is at 0 degrees, it essentially is just like volume automation. It just takes whatever it is and then makes it mono, adjusts the volume based on that. So like if this phase was 0, it's pretty mono relative to what it would be if the phase was higher, say like 360, which is perfectly out of phase. But as you can see, as we slowly click, there is a yellow, like similar shape, I guess, it's appearing. And that essentially is the other side. I'm not sure which one's, I think that's right. So the one we see right now is left, and then the next one's right. So when they're both on the auto filter screen, that means you have a stereo image now, versus if there's nothing, then it's just going to be one side that's like monoed essentially. So what this does is it makes even more wobbling, I guess. Instead of it just bouncing from like up and down in like the center, it's bouncing from up and down and left and right. And it goes back to mono. I didn't want to overuse it. It's mostly just for the downbeats, just to give it a little bit more like interesting texture. I slightly changed it for the second drop, I believe. You can see that effect even more because this is this phase for the AutoPan. It's going a lot slower. Also, the rate's a lot slower. You can definitely see the lines appearing and disappearing. So doing something like that too is cool because you're essentially doing volume automation and panning automation at the same time. So in context, that sounds like this. There's also a lot of cuts in the chords. So if you just play the chords without anything else, I'll just mute the vocal chop for now, actually. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm turning that entire group off right now. I'm turning that entire group off when the snare comes in. That way there's more space for it and it can be more atmospheric, I guess, and more minimal. As you can tell, it's pretty simple. A lot of it's just texture stuff. Like this entire group is just Foley sounds. I guess we can talk about the vocal real quick. Let me go open that. Yeah, don't save. Essentially, what I do for all the projects that were on the EP, especially the ones that had vocals, vocals are all being processed in a separate file, a separate session. The main reason I do that is because, as you can tell, there's 74 tracks on this one song, and it's way too busy, right? You don't need that much stuff going on, especially if you add vocals into the mix. Vocals, I mean, at least for this project, 4, 8? Yeah, so there's 21 tracks of vocals. So technically 19 tracks of vocals because I subtracted the 2 groups because those are tracks for some reason. As you can tell, that's a lot of just like extra stuff that's like you want to have as much CPU as possible to control that. We're going to talk about the vocals real quick. I mean, they're pretty simple. Shilpa, great singer. She ended up top lining this for me. Yeah, I'll just go through like a general thing for vocals. I don't want to give away too much. As you can tell, for the main vocal, pretty clean. I'm using like a Shure SM7B. It's the same mic that Logic uses when he's like freestyling in his trailer. Pretty solid mic, especially if you have like a decent interface. I'm using like a Duet or Apogee Duet 2 right now. You definitely need like some type of preamp though if you want to use it, just so you don't have to worry about all the noise. So essentially right now it's just a main vocal track going through a send. In addition, I'm pretty sure there's vocoders going on. Yeah, so these are vocoders that are going on in tandem. One trick to having your vocoders have more stereo width is change the formants. Like, so this was -4, this one's 2. and then pan them slightly. If you're choosing the same formants and you're using the same source material, you're just going to create phase issues. Some people can use, I know some people use chorus, they might use some reverb on one and delay on the other. I mean, whatever it takes, but they should be different, especially since they're using the same take. Like this is just the main vocal that's being run through a vocoder at 100%. And the vocoder is just playing the chords. It's a very simple operator that's doing the master. So it's very simple like that. And that layered together sounds like this. All I see is velvet and a couple to keep us warm. Very subtle. Another thing you can notice is I take out all the noise where there's no vocal occurring. The reason why I do that is because I use OTT on basically all my vocals except this one for some reason. Most of them I use OTT. Reason why I do that is because I don't want to worry about like a bad recording. It also helps a lot boost the high ends and make the vocals a little bit more cleared. Pretty much the same thing for the verse. The pre-chorus is probably the coolest part. I introduce a lower layer. And as you can see, there's a vocoder, but it's not actually using any material. It's just, it's weird though. I'll use vocoders as filtering effects. You should try that if you're actually interested. Vocoders are really cool with like filtering different things out and making vocals cleaner without actually having to do a lot. But in context, it sounds really sick. I'm waiting on those summer nights in San Francisco. Spend one time in San Diego. Show me all the places you know. Don't care if it's yeah, so this lower layer, it helps a lot, especially since the pre-chorus is pretty minimal. Gives it a lot more oomph. And then the drop comes in. Pretty simple and pretty sparse on the vocals. And then finally we have the actual chorus, which is, we can tell 2, 4, 6 layers. These are essentially just doubles that are hard pans. Then we have these like wobby vox, which is essentially just like a lot of just a guitar amp essentially through a like reverb send. So yeah, that's pretty much the vocals. Like they're pretty simple. This track in general was very simple, but there's a couple key things that make it like stand out. I guess that was the main part that I wanted to focus on for this one. If you guys are interested, I can go through the other songs in the EP. As you can probably tell, my hard drive is dying right now, so I gotta end the video pretty quick. But yeah, if you're interested in me going over any other tracks or any other tips, please let me know. I'm gonna start doing YouTube a lot more often now, just because I finally figured out a decent setup that I can use. So yeah, catch you guys later. Peace out.